Okay, folks, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Live from the Sword Coast podcast. My name is Kevin Madison, and this is entry 18 in the for me for the RPG a Day event for 2017. It's the first time you tuning in for these. This is a series of questions that are posed throughout the month of August 2017 regarding RPGs or role-playing games in general, and we respond to those different questions every day. Today's question for day 18, I realize I've mislabeled this video, so by the time this finally posts, I will correct it. The question is, which RPG have you played the most in your life? I imagine I am not alone in my vintage of play. I think I've mentioned that I got my first game in 1983 with the red box for the Menser edition of basic D&D, and then I sort of went forward from there. Not surprisingly, Dungeons & Dragons is the game I've played the most in my life. Now I'm including all the different editions together in that, because I've played every edition with the exception of Moldvay, the Moldvay basic, the Holmes D&D, and the original D&D. I haven't played any of those, but from 83 on, I've played everything. The AD&D first edition, AD&D second edition, third edition, 3.5. I'm including Pathfinder in this because it's effectively Dungeons & Dragons, just with a different trade dress. And fourth edition and fifth edition. So now that's just a big collection of a bunch of different times where I've been playing different editions, and most editions I have burned out on one way or another. And not necessarily, maybe burned out is the wrong way to say it. Just the games, no, I guess burned out. Either burned out or just something else had really attracted my attention. As you can maybe tell from my channel and from my some of my comments throughout this month, if you've been following them, I'm a bit of a gaming dilettante. I like trying different things. So I've early on been a fan of trying different, role-playing games. So I didn't necessarily stick with D&D, in particular D&D or AD&D second edition. After we started discovering other games, while we still really liked the settings for for AD&D. Around the time when Birthright came out is when I finally pulled the pin, and I just had no interest in playing AD&D second edition anymore. Of those editions that I played, just so it's not a very quick answer here, of the editions, the one that I have played the most, I've actually been thinking about this a lot the last little while, because I've been thinking about fourth edition quite a bit in the last little while. And I honestly don't know if I've played more fourth edition or I've played more basic D&D. Because unfortunately, most of my visual aids are now packed up. I'm moving at the end of the month at the time of this recording, so I don't have as many visual aids as I would like normally, but I do have all my basic D&D gazetteers here still. So I am missing one of the gazetteers, the Atragan clans, but for years and years, as they came out, I collected the original gazetteer series for basic D&D. And if you're not familiar with the basic D&D setting, or it's called the Known World or Mystara, but it really didn't get trade usage out of the Mystara thing really until it started being adapted for AD&D second edition. But the Known World was, and I've also got my nifty poster maps for them as well too. What it was a sort of collection of different cultures together that made very little sense as to why these very, very distinct, human, like historical cultures would appear in, so close to each other in a setting, because you would have, a very Arabic, Middle East flavored, like Arabian Nights flavored setting that would be within miles of a kind of Roman Empire. And then border in the north by Mongols, and then very close by would be the dwarves, and then right next to them was the elves, which were surrounded by kind of a mercantile nation. So if you thought too hard about the setting, it really didn't make an awful lot of sense. But it was fun, and it had so much variety in it. And these supplements that came out for the basic D&D game, they introduced an alternate to the proficiency rules that were introduced in AD&D. I think they were introduced in Oriental Adventures, and then they were further refined in the Dungeoneer Survival Guide and the Wilderness Survival Guide. But it was a very complex, like a lot of stuff in AD&D, it was a very complex thing that was, there were certain proficiencies that cost you more because they were harder to learn and whatever. Basic D&D did away with that and just said skills. It was one of the, if not the earliest, I think the first effort to try and do a generalized skill system with Dungeons and Dragons. And that was introduced in here in the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. And I mean, I incidentally may be pronouncing that wrong. Well, it's a fictitious place, so no, I'm not. But I've heard it pronounced a bunch of different ways, but Karameikos was the way that we always said it back in the day. So, but it introduced this interesting skill system where instead of, using the proficiencies and then having subtracted because some were more difficult to do than others, so it would screw up your ability score. You just had whatever your flat ability scores were, and then you'd gain levels in the skills. That may have been a house rule we had. I actually don't know if that's true for the default system, but if you wanted to learn, say, like tumbling, it would just be whatever you roll a d20, you want to roll your dexterity score or less, and that's will tell you whether you succeeded or not. It didn't interface quite terribly well with the thief, because at the time in D&D, original D&D, or basic D&D, the skill thieves had these a chart they would follow with different percentages for doing their skills. But for years and years, this was the default setting. So I'm getting kind of lost in a digression here. But for years and years, this was the setting that I used, and the game we used was original. BECMI, the Basic, Expert, Companion, Master, Immortal rules to run it. We had AD&D, and we sometimes adapted some rules from it, but there were a lot of rules in AD&D that we just didn't like, so we used that for it. Now the thing is, that play, the reason I think why I think 4th edition may have been a contender is because we did play this sporadically. In my misspent youth, I also played a lot of Call of Cthulhu. Once I discovered that game, we played a lot of Champions. We played a lot of Marvel superheroes. We played some Top Secret. I played a lot of Palladium games, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness, Ninjas and Super Spies, Robotech. So it wasn't our only game. I know there's a lot of folks who have like sort of they dance with the one that brung them, but I'm not that kind of player or DM. I like bopping around a lot. By contrast, 4th edition was pretty much a solid run of running just that. I had a 3 or 4 year run where the only game I ever ran was 4th edition. I owned a bunch of different games at the time, but 4th edition was the game that we kept going to, and we had a bunch of different sub-campaigns in it. We never played to the Epic tier, but we did play a bunch of characters up through to the Paragon tier. So if you're not familiar with 4th edition D&D, that had 3 different kind of tiers of play in it. They had Heroic play, Paragon play, and Epic play, which represented levels 1 to 10, 11 to 20, and 21 to 30, respectively. And that game, I had as I've mentioned in several of these videos throughout this month's exercise, I had a lot of fun running 4th edition, and I have had a chance to play it only once, unfortunately. But I really enjoyed playing it as well, too. I think it's a terrific iteration of the game. It was house ruled, of course, as was our version of D&D. And in terms of, so those are the editions of D&D that I played the most. In terms of setting, obviously the known world. I've run the known world. I haven't used it with 5th edition yet. Only because I've only run a handful of 5th edition campaigns or settings. I've run 5th edition in the Forgotten Realms, which I'm not a huge fan of. I've run 5th edition in a bunch of different custom settings. Actually, that's it. I haven't used it for anything else yet. But I imagine I'll get around to using it in the known world, because I've used this setting for 3rd edition. Wait, have I? Maybe I didn't. AD&D 1st and 2nd edition, I used this setting for it. I used it for Um, I haven't used it for Pathfinder either. Geez, maybe I haven't for the whole third edition. Fourth, I did. We had a whole mini campaign that was run using the known world as the setting, and I was adapting the Scales of War adventure path that was published through Dungeon Magazine. In addition, so let's see, other settings. Dark Sun was one that I played or ran, I should say, a lot. And that was only with AD&D second edition, and then a bunch of like house rules for different games. But we ran an awful lot of AD&D second edition using that. Ran a lot of Ravenloft as well too. Ravenloft was a lot. I actually played in Ravenloft more than I ran it, I think. I had a cousin growing up who was an awesome DM who ran my character was actually started in the known world because he was the one who got me into that. And then my character disappeared into the mists and we appeared in Ravenloft. So I played in Ravenloft for quite a while, and that was a lot of fun. What else? The final setting, I guess this is a later addition to the sort of campaign worlds that are published through Wizards of the Coast, but Eberron. Now, talking to some friends recently, I realized like Eberron maybe doesn't stand out as in everyone's mind the way it does in mine, in the sense that I guess a lot of people felt that Eberron, when it was first launched, suffered some stumbles in terms of marketing, that it didn't properly market what the game is. And to me, what the game is it is a very, very pulpy, or the setting, I should say. Setting is a very pulp-infused D&D. So you're playing like, globe-trotting heroes, bigger-than-life heroes that are facing, conspiracies and secret magics and whatever. The cool thing with Eberron is that I guess the default is that the game is set, I can't remember how many years, 5 years or so after this catastrophic war has come to a close. There was 5 nations when this war started. I think it's called the 100 Years' War. I may be wrong about that, but I believe it lasted for 100 years. And at the time it started, there was 5 nations. By the time it ended, there was a bunch of splinter nations. Like there was a gnomish nation. There was a nation ruled by what we would normally consider like, inhuman monsters like Medusas and mind flayers, and maybe actually they're not in charge there. Medusas, hags, and stuff like that. There was a goblin kingdom that was all hobgoblins, bugbears, and goblins. And one of the 5 nations was actually annihilated in this mysterious catastrophe called the Mourning. And I run that a lot. Like that's it, for the vast majority of the time I ran 4th edition, it was either using that or I was using the Oriental Adventures default setting of Kara-Tur. I guess I should include that. I used a lot of Kara-Tur in the various games I've run too. And Eberron is just, you're playing characters in sort of this post-war period where the nations are at, it's kind of like the 30s in our real world history. The time after the First World War, economic tensions and political tensions are forces that are working behind the scenes, which can run the range of like gnomish assassins. There are these cool things called dragon marked houses that all have it's like a lineage of certain people who have these magical marks on them that allow them specific magical powers over certain areas like travel or creation or warding or something similar. There's a draconic prophecy. But one of the really most interesting things about about Eberron for me is, in addition to the cosmopolitan setting, I really love that because you could, I think, tell more sophisticated stories more easily in that game than you can in that setting, I should say, than you can in other settings. Just because there's more mass communication, there's more mass travel, stuff like that. But the neatest thing is that it really turns a lot of conventions on its head. So the whole dichotomy between chromatic dragons and metallic dragons being evil and good, respectively, is out the window. If you see a red dragon, you can't tell at a glance whether it's going to be good, bad, selfish, whatever. You also have lots of opportunity thanks to the way that the world is set up to interact with a lot of monsters or creatures that you wouldn't normally at certain levels. So like you could, in theory, at first level, you could be hired or have as a patron a Black Annis hag who has hired you to do something on behalf of the nation of Droam, which is the nation of monsters. Or you might, go and seek knowledge from a group of orcish hermits, because the orcs in the setting are not like just savage, killer or whatever things. They're part of a primordial organization that keeps these Lovecraftian horrors locked beneath the earth in I can't remember what it's called actually. Let me think here. It's not Zendrik. Zendrik is a secret thing, other kingdom. Khyber. It's the what their version of the Underdark is, which is full of horrific aberrations like beholders and mind flayers and stuff like that. So that's the setting. So I guess I'm trying to think of any of the other settings I dig Spelljammer in theory a lot. I just haven't run it very much. I own Birthright, but I've never run it. That game is I think a great example of where art can really turn you off a setting, and the art just does nothing for me. It's so flat and generic fantasy, and I get that it's sort of what it's going for, but you compare that to the mind-blowing art of Braum in the Dark Sun setting, or Tony DiTerlizzi in the Planescape setting. Actually, I've run a fair amount of Planescape in my time as well. Birthright just doesn't hold up terribly well. So I mean that's the in terms of the game that I played most. Obviously, it's I mean not obviously, but probably unsurprisingly, given my flipping between games and my age, Dungeons and Dragons is the game that in the course of my lifetime I've played the most of. The editions I've played the most of are either 4th edition D&D and basic D&D, the BECMI version. And the settings I've used the most for those it's Eberron or the Known World or Mystara are the two things that I've spent the most time in my gaming lifetime. So it's interesting for someone who says he likes Dark Sun so much. You would have thought I would have spent more time in that kind of setting, because it was out for 4th edition, or eventually it came out for 4th edition. So something to think about. So anyway, that is my answer for day 18. Let's see here. The next question for day 19 is, which RPG features the best writing? Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I don't think I care about that one. Art is more the thing. It's more my shtick. I guess I can think about clarity of writing. I don't know. I've got a day to think about it. So in any event, if you have, as always, any questions, comments, or concerns regarding what I've talked about here, please feel free to leave an entry or leave a comment in the section below. If you're one of the folks who has left a comment previously in one of the videos in these series, thanks so much for interacting with me on the comments. I've really enjoyed the ways that this has had me thinking differently about why I game, how I game, what games I pick, what settings I pick, stuff like that. So it's been really good. It's been good to sort of look at what I've been doing to help sort of plan what's going to be happening in the last quarter of 2017 and going into 2018 for sure. So I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching, and I will see you folks again tomorrow.